Hey Ramesh, good, good. What about you?
Not too bad myself. Thank you. Thank you for being my first guest in my podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure also for me. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I've been meaning to do this podcast for a while now, and I always saw you taking part in one of the podcasts on LinkedIn, and I thought, man, I should get this guy on my first as a first guest, and also introduce you to my network, getting to know your network. That was one of the intentions, and then we have been talking about EV for a couple of years now, so it's always good to see the perspective through another pair of expert eyes. So let me perhaps start with a question. I know you love to travel a lot, and you've been to different parts of the world. What was the last trip that you took as an icebreaker? What was the last trip, the recent one?
Well, it was over Christmas and Happy New Year, or the New Year. Happy New Year is just cheering to the people.
Yeah,
And it wasn't it for 4 weeks. So backpacking trip, this is what I
awesome.
prefer because it's a big step out of the comfort zone. If you're traveling for business a lot, okay, you reach the accommodation. Basically, this is a upper class hotel. The hotel room looks nice, but you don't get in touch with the local people. And this is if you want to experience the country, the real country life, then backpacking is for sure the best advice I can give. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been to a few places in Europe with backpacking trip. It was amazing because you cannot plan everything in advance. You have to be on the flow. You have to be flexible, which is what makes the whole experience much more adventurous because you get to meet people you have not planned in advance. You get to sleep at places where you don't have, booking.com or whatever the names of the services are. So I absolutely agree that backpacking is one of the best ways to explore a new country. So did you see any EV when you were there? Any new cars that you might have seen?
And just once, to be very open to you, it was a VinFast. I didn't
Oh,
expect that because, frankly speaking, I thought it would be much more because VinFast is a local brand in Vietnam,
sure.
but it was just a taxi which drove an EV. And all the other vehicles, so mainly what is driven a lot are motorbikes and the smaller one. And you see, of course, some cars, but it's not EV. This is not didn't hit the market right now.
Yeah,
I'm sure this will happen, but right now it is not. Definitely not.
awesome. Awesome. VinFast, I've seen one on a fair, but I did not see one yet on the streets. How was it to try? Did you drive the car or did you travel?
No, no, it wasn't. We just took the cab, and
Okay, it was a taxi.
fortunately, this was an EV. I was surprised. I didn't know so much about VinFast, but I was surprised regarding the comfort. Okay, we are talking about a cab, yeah, comfort
Sure.
question mark. But the appearance was good. It was different, so you have to understand. Or the biggest issue is when you're in a completely different culture, and Vietnamese compared to German is 180-degree shift. Um, their main emphasis is different. So what is important, and also their perspective on design and style and so on. I'm used to because I travel a lot in China as well, so it's a bit different. But I was really surprised, really, really surprised. A lot of components are from the Western Europe, to be very fair. So lots of T1 suppliers are
Sure.
supporting, delivering a lot of them. But the production of the entire car was done in Vietnam. And from a quality aspect, I was positively surprised.
That's great. That's great to know. I mean, but coming back to, I think VinFast, they have huge plans, massive plans to break through into the markets of the European space and in the United States. So they have to bring in a price competitive model at the same time, not compromising too much on the quality and the comfortness, right? So the vehicles are massive. They have seven seaters, SUVs. They have like three models, I think. And yeah, I can imagine that they are having a kind of an objective to reach that part of the market with a certain quality at the same time having a price which is understandably low compared to, or let's say acceptably low in that aspect.
Especially if you look on the countryside. So Vietnam is not as rich as Germany or United States, so the average salary is much lower, and
Sure.
that the people can afford a car in this range, it has to be low. But this is where the beauty comes in. So the quality was pretty good. The money or the price in the end will be much lower than you will see in Europe for sure. Of course, they started so far in the United States, they're not market entry. Now they announced think it was just a few days old. That the first car is also produced now in Vietnam,
Nice.
or that they start the mass production. And what I've heard so far is that they also was successful in fundraising. They raised 2.5 billion US dollars, which is compared to other startup OEMs who wants to play in this field a lot.
Yeah.
Is it a lot compared to a car manufacturer? No, not at all. Yeah. But it's okay to survive a certain time.
Well put, I think. Yeah, it's a lot. Also considering the fact that they are having local engineers, local employees drive them and local market prices on subcomponents. So maybe it's comparatively really high for them to drive this market forward. Speaking of market, there are a lot of new models in the European market. When was the last time you had your EV experience, both driven and being driven? What was your favorite experience, the last one?
The last one was Vietnam, where I was the passenger, and when I sat behind the steering wheel, it's half-year old, so
Okay.
half-year roundabout, and this was and BMW i3, so nothing fancy. It's already pretty old compared to the new models. Yeah.
Okay, no, i3 is not old because it's 10-ish years old. One of the first electrified battery electric vehicles in the European space. My favorite car, because I used to work on it. So I always had a soft spot.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. It's not blaming that this is a shit box.
You did know. It's going live, so on the record.
It's just, yeah, that's fair. It's just from the battery technology, and the technology is pretty old. So when we were talking about 10 years ago, 10-ish, that's a lot in EV. So the technology is developing so fast. Now, I think we see or experience now the more slow in the EV because the development times become more and more less. So when I started with my automotive experience or professional life, that 4.5 years was the normal duration from the first digital sketch notes to the series. 4.5 years up to 5. Now we're talking about 2.5 years, and also the OEMs are quite aware when they hit the market with a new model, this is not finally done in the design process. Of course, safety aspects and so on, for sure they have to comply to that, and they do it great. Nevertheless, we're talking now about a software product in a hardware shell. And this is completely different compared to their experience.
That's a very good point. Software on wheels is the term that they're using in San Francisco. Many of these smart companies like Sony is trying to push in. We know that we have been hearing Apple has been trying to play into this game. Google wanted to create a car. I don't know where they are. So all these technology giants are trying to bring in the software on wheels kind of. So I completely agree with that. So you said i3. What would be the car that you would buy if you had the money today? An EV, or would you prefer to not buy an EV? What is your take on it?
Very good point. I would prefer shared mobility or a leasing model. The reason is quite easy because the technology is still ongoing in the development phase. So, and it's rapidly changing. I don't know if you saw the announcements from CATL, for example, that now they bring the Quillen battery, the third generation of the cell to pack with incredible gravimetric density. The second battery, what they announced was the natrium soda battery, which is now in the series production for a passenger vehicle car, so low cost. This will be a game changer for sure in this segment. And the third one is that they announced, condensed battery. Condensed battery with 1 hours per kilogram. Of course, on cell level, you have to see how this moves on on a pack level. Nevertheless, here we go. And having this in mind, and you purchase a car and drive this 2 or 3 years, this might be pretty old, and you don't know how the aging looks like, and when you sell it, how much money you get back. So I would prefer the leasing model or shared mobility because you just drive it and then you give it back and you get the latest version. I think as soon as the level is reached where the technology development is more and more incremental because you have the energy density and the pack size doesn't matter so much anymore in terms of range and fast charging capabilities and lifetime. Then I would consider purchasing.
Yeah.
But we're just at the beginning.
I think I can agree with the pace that you mentioned, the amount of technologies that are coming out every year. Every new cell manufacturer, cell technology manufacturers are coming in with more energy density, more safety, more clever ways of integrating the cell into the chases. I completely agree with you. To give you some perspective on your previous comment, you said it's an old technology. I think BEV technology itself is not that old. The first car, as you might remember, the first, in a sense, mass market car was Tesla Roadster. It came at the point of the recession back in 2008, 2009. So if you calculate that, we are around 15, 16 years down the lane of a pure BEV battery electric car. Tesla Model S came along. It kind of convinced the legacy automakers, and then the i3, and then the rest of the story. So I think the battery technology per se is quite young. It's nothing to be compared with the legacy systems where it's an internal combustion engine or anything of that sort, right? So I completely agree. The pace at which it's developing is unbelievable, and I also think the energy density is going to go another level when we see the solid state come into effect, right? But I would not be much worried about the aging because moreover, the usage of the cars are not that much. I mean, even if you drive a couple of kilometers a day, let's call it a couple of thousand kilometers a month. I just recently read a report by a Tesla Model S from 2012. It has done 200,000 miles and it has lost 12% of range. In other words, it has an SOH evaluation of 88% from the initial capacity, which is unbelievable. I mean, when was the last time you saw an ICE application which had 200,000 miles on the clock? And it had two sets of tires, or three sets of tires, and one set of brake. That was the change happened in that 200,000 miles. You cannot match that in ICE application. That is absolutely the sustainability aspect. So I'm completely on the side that you have to drive an electric car long enough for you to make a positive impact on the environment, not just change cars often and not driving it, just keeping it in your garage. That is not going to be a carbon neutral thing to do. That is my opinion. What would you say?
Well, I think in the end, it's a question of your personal preference. You touched base on the sustainability aspect, and of course, we have to lower the CO2 footprint, and based on that, shared mobility will be probably the best in terms of utilization of the vehicle. 80, 90% of the vehicles just stand still.
Yeah.
You're not using the average working day. That's for sure. And also on weekends, you don't drive crazy distances. So the range anxiety I cannot understand from a private perspective. If we're talking about salespeople, probably 5 days per week on the street, covering a lot of distance in kilometers, might be different. But what I also see is not only focusing on the vehicle, also on the ecosystem, what the OEMs offers. And we talked a lot about Tesla. We talked about NIO. In my opinion, they made just a great step in the right direction. They're considering what is the need of the customers and the pain points, and we're just offering the entire package. So compared to other OEMs, they are lagging behind. Of course, now they understand we have to do something in this way, but it's not so convenient like those two brands I named. Even NIO, where you can sit in your car, swap the batteries, and done in 5 minutes. I think such kind of business models will be becoming more and more important and change the entire automotive industry. So yes, you're right in terms of aging. In the end, the technology improvement is the differences which will decide if your car is still the money worth or not. And this is something what I cannot estimate or predict. And it's pretty tough for me.
Mm-hmm.
So based on this, I would like to avoid purchasing a car. And this is, I think, the point. In terms of fast charging capabilities or more range, more energy content or whatever, honestly spoken, this is not where I'm concerned about. But losing money based on the next big thing, which hits the market, might be so much better. So which probably reduces the value, the end value of your existing car. This is different.
Yeah, the commercial aspect is definitely a challenge, especially with the technology moving so fast on a lot of new players. I could not agree more. I think it's going to be one of those things where people will have to look deeply before they purchase a car, a traditional way of purchasing, or they might go for a subscription-based model where they say, "Hey, we have a model where we can pay $400, $500 a month. Everything is paid except for the electricity, which we need to recharge. We don't have any liability at the end of the day. After 12 months, we can return the car, and if you don't need it, we don't need it." That could be also an opportunity for people who are looking in this from a commercial aspect of things.
Yeah, you mentioned now the newcomers, brands and startups which come or enter the game. What do you think? Are we already on the consolidation stage where it will be pretty tough to succeed as a startup, or is the field still open? What's your opinion?
I mean, I'd probably answer this in two stages. The first stage is, are we in a stage of consolidation? I do not think so, not yet, especially if you see that there are very few players, if at all, in the space of 20 to 25,000 euros family car, a BEV for city, if you will, where this was the mass market when we compared the diesel technology and the petroleum technology, right? So you had your Golf, you had your 206, you had your Japanese cars, be it Civic or Prius, whatever that is. That was the car that the Corollas, the mass market kings. I think there's not yet a champion in that space. ID2 might be the case, or the Tesla's $25,000 car might be the case. Of the cannibalization and the consolidation will happen probably in the next 10 years, not immediately. That's the first thing. And I do have a critical opinion about startups. I think many of these startups, their hearts and mind in the right place. Nothing, disrespectful, but they are focusing on the successes of the likes of Teslas and Rivians. But if you think about it, there has been over 1,000, maybe even more startups that started after Tesla, and they're nowhere to be seen. Even some big names have gone through some troubles in terms of investment, some troubles in terms of mass production. What I'm trying to say is, it is easy for a legacy automaker, if they put their hearts and mind in place, to get to the game and actually challenge the likes of Tesla. For example, VW are in a good place. Ford are trying to be there as well. Stellantis is actually under the radar, but they're actually challenging them with a lot of good products. But if you ask me if there is another startup that could be a Tesla killer, I highly doubt that. I really highly doubt that, because it's one thing to get a prototype, as you know, we have done this prototype thing probably hundreds of times with different projects, but it is another thing to bring that to a mass scale where you have to check the quality, you have to take care of the variations, you have to take care of the product roadmap. And that is something which actually puts you through hell till you actually come across that part. Okay, so yeah, that's my answer. I think the legacy automakers, especially VW and Ford, might be extremely successful if they keep at it. I don't see any favorites in terms of startups. It's a long shot.
You brought up a very interesting point. This was about not consolidated yet. You assume it will be roughly in 10 years because the mass market is not hit so far. Now Tesla announced to offer a car in this range, and also VW is announcing this. That will come up I think it's the ID2.
Right, 2025.
And this is an interesting point, because what did Tesla do and extremely successful? They entered in the absolute upper class market where the margins are much bigger. So this was the reason why they survived for so long. Of course, they did a lot of things at the right time, in the right direction. And then they went down to the middle class area and now into the entry level. The interesting thing is, as slower you come, of course, there's a lot of big volume behind, but the margin is pretty low. When I see that a startup wants to enter specifically in this market, I completely doubt that, because they have not the competences within the corporation when it comes to mass production, because this is a game changer. If you're capable of that, you learn already a lot, and you know this is highly capital intense, and you need the right people and the financial backbone for that. I doubt that they have it. And you compete against players who are pretty long established in this market, knows exactly how the game will be played. Nevertheless, when you compare the margins of the Tesla compared to all other legacy OEMs, gap is huge.
Yeah, it's massive. It's absolutely massive. I think one of the reasons why it's huge is Tesla took the rule book and they tossed it in the garbage can, because they said, okay, this is automotive, but we are not an automotive OEM, even though we make cars. And they did not go through the classical approach. They did not stick with the welded joints. They went on a mega casting approach. They did not stick with a software that changes once in a year. They did over-the-air updates, sometimes even almost weekly. And they kind of stuck to the gun. They did not change the strategy just because there was pressure from the market. I mean, there was an interesting video I saw a couple of weeks ago where Mr. Musk explained about the production hell for the Tesla Model 3 2017 timeframe, where he said he actually slept on the production floor every single day to make sure that every single problem was solved. And that's kind of hands-on. And I don't know if that is that kind of commitment. And he's also a clever person. Let's not take that away from him. That the combination is really hard to come by, and the visionary to go to an extent where the legacy automakers were not even thinking about it. He went the opposite way, and by doing so, he actually convinced the most adamant ICE supporters and legacy automakers. To give you just one example, Tesla came up with the NMC chemistry, right? So they were using NMC chemistry across all models. And suddenly in 2017, 2018, it shifted. They started talking about the LFP systems, and they spoke with CATL. So they were asking to Musk in an interview, this was back in 2018, 2019 timeframe, hey, we thought you didn't like LFP and you're going for LFP now. He said, yeah, the LFP as such is not great, but if you add some manganese in there, it's going to be brilliant. And at that point of time, it was one of those lines in many of the interviews that he had. But if you think about it now, in 2023, LMFP is the chemistry that CATL is pushing forward. It's also something that BYD is trying, other LFP manufacturers are trying. So what he cooked as a recipe back then for the Tesla Model 3 and why the standard edition, it is kind of setting a stone as a standard product. So it's going to be the natural successor of the LFP, and it might also pave way to kind of other recipes involving LFP. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think he was bold enough and he's clever enough to take decisions which others would not have done. And by doing so, he was able to convince the likes of Ford. Ford is actually talking to CATL. They had an announcement last year that they're actually building a plant in the United States. So they're going to have dual strategy of chemistry. Same with Rivian. Rivian is actually switching to LFP now. Not entirely, but they're going to offer every single model that they have also with LFP option, which is crazy if you think about it. I mean, Ford is one of those trendsetters, have been always, and if they are inspired by a guy like Musk and a company like Tesla, that is the goal that they set, the bar that they set, and they're still thrashing every production record that they have set, every revenue record that they have set, which is unbelievable. So that's the answer. So I think if you are doing it right, and if you are a clever person taking that decision, which is based on scientific facts, sky's the limit.
What do you think is the reason that Elon Musk has decided to switch to LMFP or LFP in the end? So LFP was the first initial shot for the entry level. Do you think we see now a complete change from NMC to LFP in the passenger vehicle segment, or for example, in the commercial vehicle segment? What's your opinion on that?
I was quite skeptical. I was never a big fan of LFP, to be honest. I mean, I always thought NMC, thanks to the low temperature performance and the high energy density, would be the way to go, especially in the battery electric vehicle space, the BEV space. But I was proven wrong, not just by Mr. Musk and Tesla, but CATL, BYD. They stuck their guns. They kept on improving that technology. And I saw the figures. I think in the year 2021, 2022, over 50% of the cars that were sold from Tesla were based on LFP or LMFP, which is amazing, which is a statement. You could see it from two dimensions. I mean, you're a business guy, so you might see this as, okay, they are cannibalizing their own market segment, but they're selling less NMC models than LFP models. As one way of seeing it. There's also the counter argument that says if they had sold just the NMC cells, they would not have offered this particular product lineup, which is the cheaper version, the standard range, which obviously entices people to go in and buy it, who usually might have bought because they said $60,000 for a car is too much. But if you see now, it's $39,000 with all the price cuts, with all the, on top, you get some incentives from certain governments if you're on the right. So I think it was a clever strategy, and by doing so, by switching in early stages and also having a recipe of LFP, which suits their car needs, was an absolute masterpiece of a move. Because if you were a traditional automotive guy, you would have gone through lots of specification, pre-testing. They might have done the testing as well, but it's the drive to make that decision. And by taking that decision, they are really successful now, which I definitely did not think 5-6 years ago.
So finally, if you have the choice to get a Tesla Model 3, I know that you like this a lot, in the long range, which includes or has NMC, or the standard Model 3 with LFP. Let's exclude the range. What would you prefer?
I mean, if you exclude the range, I'd probably still go with NMC because I've driven both models. I've tested both extensively over thousands of kilometers in winter. And I have to say, even now, with all the Tesla's clever gimmicks on thermal management, there are times when you get into the car is cold, battery is cold, outside it's -2, -3 degrees Celsius. The recuperation energy that you get in an NMC, where you're braking and you get the energy back, it's still massively high at that temperature compared to LFP. So LFP would just coast you, and NMC, if you take the foot off the pedal, the regenerative system will kick in and will take energy. So the range, it's not per se the energy content in the battery, but it's also how much energy can you take back in different temperature zones. So I will definitely stick to the long range, regardless of the range. That is my opinion. Because I'm a thermal guy, I've done battery thermal management for over 7 years in my career. So I see that the cells are doing way better. I know there are a lot of politics on the NMC, especially the cobalt. But to give you a fact, I told a friend today, in the year of 2021, just in the Q4, so between the months of October and December, Apple sold 90 million units of AirPods Pro. 90 million, right? That's just one quarter. If you calculate the amount of cobalt that's built in, the NMC, if you translate that into car, I know it's not one-to-one translate, but just to give you a picture, you could build 1,039 Tesla Model S each with 130 kilowatt hours. That is the amount of batteries that are built into just one very small headphone that from one small aspect of things, so one small timeline. Now translate that into the iPods, the iPads, the phones, the laptops. You are completely on the other side of the scale, and you're nowhere near the automotive spectrum which we are currently today. And I think the smartphone industry is moving in the right direction of recycling the metals, and I believe very much so that the automotive industry will be following that path as well, where we will get back most of the minerals in a commercially acceptable way, where there's a certain amount of push and support from the local regulations from Europe and the United States. And once that is there, the NMC equation will go out of the equation, at least to an extent, where we can say, hey, it's still a recycled car with recycled NMC content in there, which would make the whole game a bit more sustainable. And I see you're very clever. You took over my podcast and you're asking me all the questions. So let me ask you a question. So I know you're in the field for a very, very long time, and you've worked with some of the big names in the industry in terms of automotive suppliers. And I really respect your view on the business development side of things. So two questions. First part of the question is, where do you think the electromobility market is going, thanks or no thanks to the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act? And do you think there will be a counteraction from Europe, that Europe is also offering a certain level of incentive to manufacturers that are being built, facilities being built in Europe? What is your take on that?
So just to get it right, the first question, you was touched base on the inflation.
Exactly, Production Act.
Yeah, okay. First of all, beside the business aspect, I think you need these incentives, especially in those regions, to strive zero emission as fast as possible. So basically, this is a good thing because you invest in future technologies. I know there might be some listeners who said, hey, battery cars are not so environmentally friendly, and the CO2 footprint needs to consider from the energy consumption to manufacture cells and stuff like that. Of course, nevertheless, if you look on the reports, you can already see how much shares the transportation takes by sea, by car, and so on. So basically, we have big homework to do, and this is for sure the right actions they take to attract those companies. If you look on the EV rates in generally, you see China is definitely the leading region right now when it comes to adoption rates. Europe is on the second place, and on the third is the United States. Even that Tesla made electrification more popular than any region, any OEM did in the past. Nevertheless, it seems to be that they are lagging a bit behind. And therefore, it's understandable, in my opinion, that they put such kind of incentives to attract those companies, that they get a more robust supply chain within the region. Because what we also see is the Ukraine war, the raw material fluctuations, the pandemic hit the entire supply chain heavily. This is driven that the most raw materials and cells and stuff like that comes from the Asian market. So there's already a disbalance. And what happens when the second pandemic hits in? You need a robust supply chain, and the best what you can do is going back from the globalized thinking towards the regionalization. So therefore, I can fully understand that. what kind of impact does this has on Europe, for example? I think the differences or the challenges are not so big because Europe is already pretty well established within the technology level and the industry. Of course, some companies might consider investing in the United States is more profitable and useful than in Europe. This might happen, but this is just a short picture in a very, very long time period. So this might be just a moment, and then if we are talking about in 1 or 2 years, the entire picture might be different. So I have to say, keep calm. It will pass. Go on.
Oh, excellent. I mean, this is. Go ahead. Sorry.
Personal opinion. This is also the same way when it comes to wars. This is a very terrifying event. Nevertheless, the supply chain or the restructuring of the supply chain showed it takes a little bit of time, 1, 2, 3 years, but the world and the economies are pretty adaptive to that. And if you have a good risk management, yeah, it will pass.
No, that's one of the most positive aspect in the sense of opinion that I have heard in the context of IRA. So thank you for that. I know we are closing in on the 45-minute time frame now. So to finish off, I do receive a healthy amount of, hey, what would you suggest that if I want to be in the electromobility space, I want to be a junior business development manager, a sales engineer. So I know you have a lot of experience in that space and you've been extremely successful. What would you give as an advice to someone who's aspiring to follow the path of business development, sales management in the automotive space, especially in the context of electromobility? What would be your advice?
So first and foremost, and this is important for any sales job you're doing or want to do, you have to be confident about the product you want to sell at 100%. So if you're not into this product or service, don't do it, because your clients will get a feeling about that you're not standing behind the company, behind the product. So this is the first and foremost advice I can give. The second one is, don't be afraid to learn, that you don't know everything. It's a very steep learning curve. Learn every day and just do it. And
Right.
it's not a shame that you don't know something. You will learn continuously. So be open, making failure. And the third thing is, don't start an entry level in a company who has not experienced sales managers or where the sales enablement is not established, because you need salespeople who can support you in terms of sales qualification, learning and training you the toolbox,
right?
Because that's a craftsman job. And don't try to learn this by your own and thinking you can do it. This is just a waste of time. So, summarized, choose the company with the perfect fit on the product, which ignites your spark, your enthusiasm. The second point is, don't be afraid to make failures. And the third one is, just accept and hiring when the sales team is pretty experienced, that you can learn from them.
Excellent. Now those are some inspiring words, and make sure to click that to the LinkedIn post I'm going to post in the next couple of days, and I'll send you a link to it. Björn, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on this podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time. And I hope to do this in the near term again if the series continues.
Thank you very much for having me, Ramesh. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Have a wonderful evening and talk to you soon, my friend.
Yeah, same to you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.